Point-of-view shots, also called subjective camera or first-person camera, let the director show us what a character or object is looking at. Most often, we get a shot of a character looking at something, followed by a shot showing the character's reaction. The technique is widely used, much more than we even register. In fact, Jean-Luc Godard called it the most natural cut in cinema. So what makes a POV shot powerful rather than simply informative? And which characters and genres can benefit from the use of subjective camera? To answer these questions, let's look at some iconic scenes that include POV shots. 4 types of point-of-view shots are especially useful and powerful. Not your average POVs like in science fiction and action movies, POVs distorted by drugs or illness, POVs of monsters pursuing victims, and POVs of inanimate objects, which see everything but are helpless to change the narrative. So let's see how point-of-view shots get all of this done. One of the most noteworthy early uses of POV shots in cinema was in an action scene, a snowball fight in Abel Gance's 1927 film, Napoleon. Moving forward, point-of-view shots have continued to be a highly useful tool in action scenes, thanks to their obvious power for immersing the viewer in the action. In The Amazing Spider-Man, we see Peter Parker learning to be Spider-Man both from a third-person and first-person perspective, the latter giving us the exhilarating thrill of living in a superhuman skin. But point-of-view shots are useful for less aspirational characters as well. In The Terminator, many of Arnold Schwarzenegger's scenes are filmed from the optical point of view of his T-800 cyborg's vision. This perspective reminds us of the mechanical nature of the central character and reinforces his lack of humanity and inability to feel empathy for his victims. Similarly, in the 1987 movie Predator, optical POV was used again to show the heat vision the alien Predator uses to locate its victims. The POV shots allow the director to show, rather than tell us, about their technologically enhanced vision. However, a little first-person camera goes a long way. 2015's Hardcore Henry was shot exclusively from Henry's point of view, making it feel more like a first-person shooter game than a movie. The non-stop first-person action feels like a 90-minute roller coaster ride. Fun at first, but after a while, tiring and nauseating.
Well, at least we know you're not deaf.
Spider-Man, Hardcore Henry, the Terminator, and the Predator have perspectives that are dramatically far removed from an average human point of view. In fact, especially in the case of the latter two, we have so little in common with these characters that we can't get an intuitive grasp of their nature from external observation alone. Any character in an altered state of consciousness can be an interesting candidate for POV shots as well. In Danny Boyle's cult movie Trainspotting, the protagonist Mark Renton escapes a treatment facility and immediately overdoses on heroin at his dealer's house. As we experience the high through Mark's eyes, we see ourselves falling away into the carpet he's lying on. Lou Reed's lyrics in the soundtrack seem to speak to Mark's feeling protected and comforted by heroin. By juxtaposing Mark's view with external shots of his limp body being dragged to a taxi for the hospital, the director shows us the chasm separating Mark's own perception of his drug use from our objective observation of his addiction. In Enter the Void, director Gaspar Noé also uses first-person camera to show the protagonist Oscar's drug use and hallucinations. But Oscar's altered consciousness goes beyond drugs to death itself. After Oscar's shot, we follow his soul on an out-of-body experience as it flies above the Tokyo streets and beyond. An example of first-person perspective affected by physical illness can be found in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, an autobiographical film about locked-in syndrome. The protagonist, Jean-Dominique, is a man with full mental capacity trapped inside a completely paralyzed body.
Je suis le docteur Cocheton. Voilà les infirmiers. Nous sommes là pour nous occuper.
Through the extreme close-ups of his doctor's face, the muffled voices, and the sounds of his own breathing, we gain a glimpse into the extreme claustrophobia the hero is experiencing. Here we also see how subjective sound can strengthen the effect of a visual POV shot. As Jean-Dominique begins to realize that he can't even tell his doctor his consciousness is intact, shots from his perspective seem to trap us with him in a Kafka-esque waking nightmare. While they can provide unique perspectives and insights about characters, POV shots can also hide things from the audience. Most importantly, they can hide through whose eyes we're observing the scene. This is the origin of Steven Spielberg's iconic POV shots in Jaws. The mechanical prop sharks Spielberg had to work with were so unconvincing that he couldn't afford to show them up close. He conceived a clever series of underwater shots that represented the shark's eye view as it circles to attack, which allowed him to keep the scene suspenseful without actually showing the shark. Counterintuitively, watching the attack through the shark's eyes proved to be more horrifying than actually seeing the shark itself, so necessity brought about some of the most chilling shots in history. Similarly, in the opening shot of Halloween, we observe the scene through the eyes of an anonymous intruder. Adding an element of the unknown to a scene of pursuit by filming from the point of view of the attacker magnifies the horror we feel while allowing the scene to stay dynamic.
Michael!
At the end of the scene, we realize that the intruder is Michael Myers, but as a child. This revelation adds a final jarring shock to the scene. And this technique of giving the point of view of the attacker has become a staple of the horror genre, confusing our loyalties as we're welcome to identify with the hostile gaze, while also scaring us because we can't see who this villain is. Another example of hiding information from the audience, though not in a horror or pursuit genre, is the noir Dark Passage, starring Humphrey Bogart. Despite having Bogart's superbly marketable face to work with, the director Delmer Daves shoots the first 37 minutes from Bogart's character's point of view, frustrating the audience's desire to see the familiar and beloved actor. In that time, we see a picture of our character, but played by a different actor, pre-plastic surgery. And the first time Daves cuts out of POV, we see Bogart covered in bandages. Making us wait for the pleasure of seeing Bogart is a touch of humor, as well as daring. Meanwhile, the point of view shots put us in an immersive mystery. Right away, we hear the escaped convict's clothes described.
Where'd you get them pants?
Flash, we interrupt this program to warn all listeners in the North Bay area. Be on lookout for a convict who escaped from San Quentin 15 minutes ago, last seen wearing gray prison trousers, black shoes.
And we look down at our own clothing, unable to really see ourselves. That is him. So we're placed in a confusing and disorienting situation, wondering who we are, if we're a good or a bad guy, and piecing together this puzzle of identity. Finally, the fourth type of standout POV shot that we'll discuss is the inanimate POV, meaning any scene shot from the perspective of an object or immobilized person. Tarantino's trademark trunk shots are a perfect example of this category. The sudden blast of light and the unnaturally large figures of the captors looming above convey a feeling of complete, unnatural powerlessness. The same feeling is conveyed in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly through shots from the paralyzed hero's perspective, showing that POV shots can operate on multiple levels. Breaking Bad and its successor Better Call Saul also feature numerous inanimate POV shots, with cameras affixed to what feels like every single object on set, including a frying pan, dryer, shovel, and a Roomba vacuum. One function of these shots is to spy on heroes when they're doing something illicit. With mute objects, they're only witnesses. So we see multiple shots of Walt hiding money in the air vent. But these inanimate POV shots are also connected to the show's driving principle. As film critic Todd VanDerWerff points out, Walter's choice to cook meth in the first episode is the catalyst of an unbreakable chain of events, which will unfold no matter what, like a chemical reaction. The narrative arc in prequel Better Call Saul feels even more inevitable, since we already know how Saul and Mike end up in Breaking Bad. As we see the characters struggle to become masters of their own fates, we the viewers are painfully aware of how futile their efforts are. This feeling of petrified powerlessness is echoed in the numerous inanimate POV shots, which make the viewer feel like a mute witness, a fly on the wall, watching something akin to a Greek tragedy play out. POV on its own can become gimmicky. Working with only one perspective can limit the visual and narrative richness of a story. So often it's most powerful in conjunction with other techniques, say with cuts away from first person, in dialogue scenes,
Can I share something with you?
or reserved only for key moments. The shot tends to be most effective when it feels natural, or we barely notice we're shifting into the character's inner mind. But visualizing perspective in unusual ways can be a riveting, innovative use of film form. And the more removed the point of view is from our own, the more fascinating it is. Movies allow us windows into different perspectives and experiences, so there's no more fundamental cinematic pleasure than seeing through someone else's eyes.